Hey everybody, we're the good doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I am Dr. Kristen.
And you are very welcome to our channel. We are two doctors. We're social scientists with PhDs who love to have conversations about all kinds of culture, popped and lived varieties, you name it. We are empathy educators, and we believe firmly that learning about different folks and different cultures is a huge, huge step to take in terms of building empathy within yourself and working towards a more inclusive community, whether small or global. We love to have conversations, hence why we're doing this, either in audio or video format. But we also love to have conversations, but besides just the two of us. So please make sure wherever you are listening to this, that you like and subscribe and follow along and comment when you want to. We would love to extend the conversation to include your lovely selves.
This video is part of a brave content list, to be honest. A challenge we set ourselves that we're inviting you all along with, called Colonizer's World Tour, which is the product of a realization we had that we don't talk about colonization enough. So for the rest of 2021, and most likely until we run out of countries, we're going to be examining a different country every week and looking at the effect of colonialism upon that country. This week is Fiji.
This week we're in Fiji.
Things I knew about Fiji before we began this research.
Yeah.
It is an island. I threaten to go there whenever I am stressed. They like rugby.
Yeah.
Summary of my Fijian knowledge.
Uh-huh.
Yourself?
Absolutely nothing to add to that. I knew it was pretty. I knew it was a honeymoon destination for lots of white folks who have that kind of money and are so inclined.
In my brain, they're one of the places that has the like thingy over the water where you're like in your cabin, but you look down. I don't know if that's true, but like in my brain, they're one of those places.
Yeah, where like the whole resort is on the water.
It's on the water. Yeah.
You can be in a cabin on the water. Yeah. I would definitely say that was Fiji, whether that is true or not. I knew they were good at rugby. We love rugby. And we watch a lot of international rugby, especially in the big tournaments. And so I knew they were quite good at it. And that is literally all, folks. So was super excited to go on this journey and to explore things together and now with you.
We're assuming you probably know about as much as us if you're not from the South Pacific. In case we're right, let's go to the map. So Fiji is an island country in Melanesia, which is part of Oceania, which is in the South Pacific Ocean. It's an archipelago of 330 islands, only a third of which are permanently inhabited. So, okay. 87% of the folks live on two islands, Viti Levu and Vanua Levu. I am butchering that. Forgiveness, please. The population is under a million, just under though, about 926,000. Cities are Suva, that's the main one. There's probably other tiny ones, but colonialization means that I don't know them. The languages, there are tres. One is Fiji, the other is English, and the third is Fiji Hindi for reasons that Dr. Erin will get into in a little bit of time. The population is 56.7%. Now, I'm sure that is incredibly accurate. How you get 0.7% of a person is one of the reasons I don't trust statistics. But 56% Indigenous Fijians. Interestingly, they own 90% of the land, and that will come up again in a few moments with Dr. Erin. About 38% of folks are Indo-Fijians who came over with indentured service with the Brits. Again, Dr. Erin will get into that. The Fijian dollar is pretty tied to the US dollar. You get 2 Fijian dollars to a US dollar around there. It has been a democratic republic-ish since the 1970s, since 1970 when it became independent from the UK. And it's been a republic since 1987. There's been 4 coups. There's a coup culture, like it's coups a go-go around here. Lots and lots of coups. I had to learn how to spell coup again for this video, which is not something I had before. In terms of religion, it's highly Christian. Those were the missionaries that came over with the British Empire. 64% generic Protestant Christian, mostly Methodist, to be honest. The largest proportion is Methodist. Then you have 28% Hinduism, which I'm going to guess came with the indentured servants from India. And around 6% of the population are adherents of Islam. The economy is one of the most developed economies of the Pacific Islands, and there are lots and lots of natural resources. If you haven't picked up on this before, natural resources mean colonizers.
So, kind of a big part.
Anywhere there is massive colonization, there was probably a lot of natural resources. So in Fiji now, their major import and their major industry is tourism, but really it's timber, fish, gold, and copper were kind of the biggest ones that that had the white people show up. And now there's a really big market culture, which is predominantly how women make money, but it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? Unstable.
I was precarious.
Precarious was actually the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
And so while it is the backbone of female economy, it is also very indicative of the way that females live their lives in Fiji, which is very precariously, to be completely honest. High literacy rate, but not, it's not compulsory education. And my guess is with the amount of islands we have here, some of these things like literacy rates and stuff is going to be ballpark guesses.
Yeah.
But it does seem to be, and a lot of this is going to be the legacy of the missionaries, especially Methodist missionaries were real big on literacy. And so it is a highly literate culture. To what degree, to what effect, in what language, the stats do not tell us. In terms of queer life, it's an interesting one, I'll be really honest, because it was the second country in the world to explicitly list sexual orientation as a protected class in 1987. And then it has expanded that to be sexual orientation and gender identity as a protected class, but same-sex marriage is banned.
Yeah.
So this is an interesting conundrum to me. However, as many South Pacific, Polynesian, Melanesian islands do, there is a third gender culture within the traditional religion, which could be why the legal protections exist without the marriage. We didn't find, in my admittedly limited search, any real exploration of that difference. And so if any delightful experts on Fijian law regarding same-sex unions are watching this video, we'd love to be educated around that particular conundrum, because it does seem a little bit unbalanced to me, just in terms of logic. But we were the same in the United States for a little while, so I can't. It's not trying to throw stones here, but I'm trying to understand from their perspective what the argument is. Now, all of these things we got to because of colonization.
Because colonization. Yeah, and I wonder, before we move too quickly off of queer life, if again it's the impact of, speaking of colonization, the impact of Christian missionaries and the idea that, like, sure, you can be a transgender person, but procreation,
you don't marry someone.
Procreation needs to be male, female, like, and
marriage has to be how much of the Western
exactly
stuff became part of marriage culture.
Again, we don't know. If anybody watching this would like to help educate us further, please do so in the comments below. We love documentaries and articles and TED Talks and whatever you can find. Hit us with it. So the history of colonization is a really interesting one, as Dr. Kristen alluded to already, with the impact of people from the Indian subcontinent. Oh, the Brits. The first contact with the Brits happened in 1789, and by the early 1820s, the first Western port opened named Levuka, which then brought an influx of Christian missionaries into the 1830s as they followed the resources and the ships. The first Europeans to maintain contact were sandalwood merchants, whalers, and sea cucumber traders. You heard me. I said sea cucumber traders.
Every time she says that, I just flash to when I'm fishing in Stardew Valley and trying to connect sea cucumbers and thinking, that's not a real fish. It is a real fish,
It is a real thing.
Noted.
They're so strange to look at. You know, it's a fascinating part of Fijian history. There's a lot of them in the coral reefs. What we also saw with this influx of Christian missionaries was a lot of forced cultural change, which I hinted at with the possibility of impacting their regulation of queer life. They were unified as a kingdom of Fiji for a little bit under this dude named Kabukau. I'm totally pronouncing that wrong. In 1871, but that government specifically faced a lot of pushback in terms of legitimacy and whether it was economically viable, trying to unite all the varying different indigenous groups on the islands of Fiji. There was a lot of back and forth between the Brits and the Fijians about the Fijians needing help. The Americans, as we often do, threw ourselves into the hat and demanded monetary recompense for a burned consulate. So cool.
Okay, sure.
Sure. So that put more pressure on the Fijians. And so they actually asked the Brits, they offered Fiji to the Brits in 1874, which, offered, coerced. We can pick a different word. But they had a pretty decent governor early on, which is where we get the influx of indentured servants from India, because Gordon, this governor, was like, well, I don't want to enforce the indigenous people to work and mine all these resources. But you know what we need? The resources.
We need free labor.
Yeah. We need free labor. Oh, heyo, India. How about some free labor? So the Brits decided to take a bunch of people from India. Between 1879 and 1916, over 60,000 Indians were brought to Fiji to work. And that has had a huge impact and complicated legacy of colonialism and the relationship between Indigenous Fijians, which are usually known as the Italki people, and Indo-Fijians. And so there's a history of conflict over the last 100 years or so between the Indigenous Fijians and Indo-Fijians, who have claimed they were treated poorly as second-class citizens, lack of rights, etc. And it was a really interesting part of learning about Fiji to explore that I did not know anything about. And there's a couple links in our documentary or in our Google Docs that talk about that. So if you want to learn more, we've done a little bit of that work for you. It's a big part of why so many coups as well, which we promised we'd get back to. Almost all of the coups that have taken place since 1987 have to do with this conflict between Indo-Fijians and Indo-Fijians and Indigenous Fijians. One group wanting more rights and recognition, another group wanting less rights and recognition. This battle over who gets to be Fiji, what it means to be Fijian, and who gets control of the government has led to a lot of coups. So it's a fascinating place to watch. I never thought I would learn the word coup culture, but, to each their own. We also wanted to highlight a documentary that we found from Nat Geo, because a huge part of colonialism is the way we frame different cultures through the lens of the colonizer. And one of the things we learned about Fiji was through a National Geographic video documentary. And the way they talked about Indigenous peoples and the tribal traditions was very much from this outsider look at these strange natives perspectives that is very typical of a colonizer's worldview or of a Western civilization's worldview of different cultures. And so that's something to keep an eye out for, as we hope you are engaging with us in our Colonizers World Tour and finding resources and learning things. Be wary of the perspective, because that example specifically was real bad. And there were a lot of angry Slack chats to Dr. Kristen where I was like, this is super bad Brit dude who just is really being disrespectful of the nature and importance of tribal and indigenous traditions to the peoples of Fiji in a way that was uncomfortable, to say the least. But that is our potted history of colonization and Fiji. As we wrap up this video, Dr. Kristen, what's the thing you wanted to talk about? What did you learn that you wanted to say, hey, friends, I learned this?
Fiji's an interesting one for me in this, because what I learned is that some of the stuff that I thought we kind of made up was actually true. And like, I know every word to South Pacific. I assumed that a lot of what Rodgers and Hammerstein did was a lot of kind of racism in a way, and leaned into some stereotypes. And one of those is this kind of stereotype that there were cannibalistic cults. And then I learned that there absolutely were. And those cannibalistic tribes, those tribes still exist. And they're, in a way, kind of very matter of fact about their past. Like, this is who we were then. This is what we thought we were supposed to do. We don't do that now. Bye. And I like that mess, because it both says there was stuff here that at the time might have made sense in a way, but was probably still really, really wrong. And they recognize that themselves and evolved to a different place. Why they did that, I mean, it's entirely possible that there was a ton of judgment from Christian missionaries or other things like that. But I'm pretty comfortable kind of as a human saying that if worship of your God involves cannibalism and unwilling sacrifices, it's entirely possible to kind of step back and look if that there's another way possibly to worship outside of a judgmental anything. You do you, but this one falls outside of the first do no harm, then do you rule that I kind of carry. So I think for years I assumed we just misinterpreted something. And so it's actually quite enlightening to learn that this was part of a culture for a long time. I was also just really grieved to watch a lot of the situations that Fijian women are in. And there was in one of the documentaries, I can't remember which one, this woman looks at the camera and goes, I just didn't know there was any other way to be than a man beating his wife.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
It reminded me of the importance of stories and the importance of not keeping painful things to ourselves so that other people can learn that possibilities are out there. But this one was an interesting, what did you learn from me, to be honest? What about you?
Yeah, two things, one happy, one not. One of the videos that we watched that we definitely want to make sure and highlight is The Women Vendors of Nassau Village, which was a film done by UN Women that really gets into the marketplace, the dominance of the marketplace in terms of the rural and urban economies of Fijians, but especially women, because they're the ones that do a lot of the crop planting, and they pick the crops and then they travel for 10 hours to the marketplace. They sleep overnight. It's very precarious work, both in terms of instability, but also personal safety, male violence against women, and harassment, all of those things. So that was really educational and also very sad. To see the connection between economy and violence against women in that way, how it exists specifically in Fiji. The fun thing that I learned is that similarly to the New Zealand rugby team, the All Blacks, the Fijians have a traditional war dance that they perform at the start of their rugby matches. And their old war dance was called the Thimbi. And the chant dates back to 1939, where it was believed that they decided to start using it in response to playing the New Zealand team and seeing their haka. Whether that's true or not, we don't know. It was deemed ungodly by the Christian leaders of the country in the late 2000s and abandoned. They were forced to abandon it after 70 years. But it actually had a really unifying role across Fiji. Like, no matter whether you were Indo-Fijian or Methodist or Muslim, everybody loves rugby. Like, everybody. And so they all got together and they said, no, this is part of our culture. Like, it's not ungodly, it's a tradition. And the rugby union supported them. And so they got it reinstated and then they replaced it, which I didn't dig more into why that happened so quickly, but it is now the mbole. But I just love the history of that kind of sporting history and the relationship between culture and sports. And so I'm excited to watch the next performance that I see Fiji play rugby and be like, oh, it's the mbole. That's what I learned. I think that's a wrap on our Fiji 101.
I think it is a wrap on our Fiji 101. Please join us tomorrow where we enjoy a documentary about it's called a beauty pageant, but it's not. It's
we're calling it a cultural celebration.
A cultural celebration of various islands of the South Pacific in which neither one of us could wipe the grin off our face for the entire documentary. Please join us then. And then next week, by the way, we're heading to Papua New Guinea. So whether it's tomorrow or next week, we hope to see you soon here on the Colonizers World Tour.
Take care, everybody.